Artificial intelligence is the tech revolution of our times, but more than 100 countries are falling way behind those leading the AI surge and are losing out. That's what the UN General Assembly will hear this week. So what's the risk from a digital divide in AI? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Whether you know much about it or not, artificial intelligence is playing a rapidly expanding role in our everyday lives. It presents huge opportunities in medicine, teaching, shopping, transport, you name it. Basically anything to do with technology. But it also poses big risks to jobs, for example, and also in how it should be regulated, so people control it rather than the other way around. Its potential is vast, but the risks of countries falling behind is now posing a new threat of widening global inequality in an age of digitisation. The UN warns that many countries, 118 in all, are not even in the starting blocks in the AI race, many of them in the global south. Nearly 40 debates on AI are taking place at the UN General Assembly in New York, a reflection of its importance. So what are the risks of an AI digital divide? What's being done to prevent it? And how might we all be affected? We'll discuss all this with our guests shortly, but first this report from Amma Boateng.
This is Meta Ray-Ban display.
The CEO of the social media giant Meta unveils a new generation of artificial intelligence, or AI, glasses.
They're the first AI glasses with a high-resolution display.
Mark Zuckerberg is aiming to compete with rival tech companies as they race to use AI in their products. AI is transforming how we live, work, and interact with each other. It's being used in almost every area, including education, healthcare, and the workplace. According to the UN, it's set to become a $4.8 trillion market in the next 8 years. But many people fear parts of the world are being left behind. According to the UN, there's a worrying digital divide. In high-income countries, 93% of the population in 2024 is estimated to be online. That's compared to 27% in low-income countries. And AI tools enabling devices to become more sophisticated are concentrated in the hands of a few. 100 companies, mostly in China and the US, are behind 40% of the world's private investment in AI research and development. Western governments are also keen to keep up. While signing tech deals with the UK Prime Minister last week, worth billions of dollars, US President Donald Trump repeated his aim to ensure his country becomes the global leader in AI.
This agreement will also help America and our British allies dominate the future of artificial intelligence. You need the energy. You have to have the energy. That's one thing I learned very quickly. They need a lot of electricity. In the United States, you need double what we have right now just to maintain that fight. We're right now, and I want to say, leading China and the world by a lot in AI.
AI is also on the agenda at the UN General Assembly in New York.
Artificial intelligence is reshaping our world.
The UN says developing countries need to invest in infrastructure, data and skills to keep up. And while AI has huge potential, without urgent action, the benefits may remain in the hands of a privileged few. Amma Boateng, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
And let's bring in our guests. Rahul Dogra is founder of the online news site AI World Today. He joins us from Jammu in Indian-administered Kashmir. Atoosa Kasirzadeh is assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University. She joins us from Pittsburgh. And Ramesh Srinivasan is professor at UCLA Department of Information Studies. He joins us from Los Altos in California. A warm welcome to you all. I'll start with you, Rahul, if I may. You are in a part of the world that frequently has challenges, difficulties, even getting online. Is there already an AI digital divide where you are, and how is it different from the traditional digital divide?
Yeah, actually, the traditional digital divide is when we say that we are lacking some technologies. For example, a person is not having the computers or the mobile phones. But AI has escalated that a little bit more. For example, AI has involved into the healthcare sector, telecommunication, and in the education system. And we have seen the digital divide in the pandemic in the 2020, where a lot of students and workers were not able to get to the work because they were not online and they were not having access to the digital devices. So that was a big setback for all the developing and the underdeveloped countries. And even in the developing countries and the developed countries, they're in the rural areas where there is no internet currently. Around, I believe, 2.6 billion people are on not even having access to the basic digital devices. So that is an issue. And AI has actually escalated that to a large extent.
Atoosa, are parts of the developing world already falling so far behind in trying to keep up with AI that they're going to have little chance of catching up?
So according to a report that was published in 2023 by the International Telecommunication Union, around 1/3 of the world population, particularly the population from the low and lower middle income countries, do not have access to internet. So when we want to talk about digital divide in the age of artificial intelligence, I think we need to decompose the problem into a couple of subdivision problems. So one is that we know that in 2023, 1/3 of the world population didn't have access even to internet proper infrastructure. Then there's a question of whether that population, if we overcome that challenge and they get access to internet, whether the population can afford using internet in a stable way. And then there is a third dimension, which is quite important in the age of AI, which is if the population gets access and can afford, whether they are able to use the artificial intelligence meaningfully, because as you rightly mentioned, AI can be used for bad or for good. So I think we need to kind of like overcome these three different division problems in order to really provide or go over the digital divide in the age of AI.
And Ramesh, what do you think? Is the developing world already falling too far behind at this early stage?
Yeah, often these discussions of access are focused merely on providing people with a connection or with a phone, or in this case, maybe a connection to an AI system. But we've seen in research again and again and again that it's not merely about access to something that's public or universal. What we're talking about is access to technologies that are driven by and for corporations from just a couple countries, the United States and to a lesser extent, China. And when we see the global south being implicated, we see extraction of rare earth minerals, extraction of labor when it comes to content moderation around AI. I mean, look at the treatment of content moderators in Kenya, just like we saw with social media, and extraction of people's data and attention. So all of these things need to be truly democratized if our vision for AI for all, to support all around the planet, is to be realized.
But then, Ramesh, are developing countries, are there any that are effectively managing to leverage AI at the moment, do you think?
There are, of course, small-scale examples. You know, we see entrepreneurialism in different parts of the world, in South Asia, as Rahul was just mentioning. We've seen some examples in East Africa, et cetera. There's no question in my mind that a technology that can automate cognitive behavior can be useful for people in many different parts of the world. The question is who is leveraging and gaining from the data that, remember, all of this is using our own personal data, and all of this is inflating massive valuations for a few private corporations right here where I'm sitting in Silicon Valley. So that we need to change the entrepreneurialism of this. Otherwise, these massive divides we see around the planet, and by the way, even within our own countries in the West, are going to only get worsened when it comes to AI.
I mean, Rahul is harvesting everybody's data, Northeast, South and West developed and developing world. But are there risks for the developing world in being more marginalized as AI is developed by, as Ramesh points out, these two major countries and these major corporations within them?
Yes, definitely. There are risks for the people in the jobs. We can see that the content creation job is almost gone because of AI. And we have just seen ChatGPT taking over all over the internet with the text content, and then with the images content, and then we have the recent launch of the Google Nano Banana. It has actually democratized the whole new level of editing, photo editing, and in fact, it has got a lot of jobs from the. For example, I will take a simple example in this particular case. For example, we have wedding photo shoots and all the other photo shoots, but AI has actually taken over that particular thing. The photographers may be thinking like that they are losing their job, although we do understand the content needs them, and AI is actually using the content of the users. So that is a bit problem for them because of the copyright issues. Maybe AI is using an image created by me few years back.
And Rahul, is the cost of adopting AI tools and data services, is that limiting its adoption in the developing world?
And actually, when we say the digital divide or the AI divide, it is not just that access to the basic tools. Because for example, I have access to ChatGPT or Gemini, for example, but that doesn't make me proficient in AI. We have to develop in that particular things because ChatGPT and other services like the Claude and the Google Images and the whatever the chatbots that we are using, we can simply use the tools in the AI services. But what leads to the development of that is what matters.
Atoosa, what are the risks that developing countries face if they remain primarily consumers of this AI technology rather than creators of it?
Yeah, I think one of the risks is along the line of what Ramesh mentioned is that we cannot distinguish between the data that kind of like is used in order to train the systems and make these systems better and the artificial intelligence. In the term artificial intelligence, we don't see the word data, but data is actually a necessary component. And so if people just consume the systems, basically the data that they are kind of like the data that companies obtain from the interactions of people with these devices will be used by the companies in order to leverage their system. So of course, people could benefit from technology in principle. For example, there was actually a study that came out by Microsoft that showed some versions of the generative technologies are being used in some African countries where people do not have access to education, and the students are improving on their particular critical abilities. So, of course, we need to interpret that in relation to whether that technology is developed well or not. But I really believe that these technologies, when they are used properly, can be very beneficial and can increase the well-being of humans and flourishing of human beings. But obviously, when a country owns its own technology and infrastructure, then people can completely have a sovereignty over artificial intelligence. And we can see that when we compare China and the United States and the attitudes they are taking in relation to artificial intelligence development. Like China uses its own generative AI systems, develops its own generative AI systems. The workforce in China contributes towards improving the quality of generative AI systems in China, and the US is doing that. But I think we need to kind of cut through this bipolarity, and more countries, more regions in the world needs to go AI sovereign, meaning that they need to build their own artificial intelligence infrastructure according to their own values and empowering the people of that particular region in relation to development and deployment of AI.
Ramesh, I see you nodding away there on that sovereignty issue. Obviously, Google's invested in AI research centres in Kenya and Ghana, in South Africa. The local billionaires working with NVIDIA to launch a content-first AI hub. Is that an effective partnership for those countries, or is that a risk of their AI sovereignty?
Yeah, I mean, look, when it came to social media, we saw almost no sovereignty for almost any places in the world or any countries in the world. And that in many ways, even here in the United States, we've had just numerous congressional sort of parades of social media people in front of our U.S. Congress, and nothing has really happened. I mean, you all For our colleagues in the EU, this is a different story, and so on. So remember, this is all being driven by just a few American corporations. So it's a very, small set of players, an oligopolic kind of system. And the goal is to extract as much as possible data, labor, minerals, water, energy from other parts of the world, right? So for example, there were these announcements with Trump and Keir Starmer around AI infrastructure that you alluded to. Yes. There are other announcements around sharing infrastructure, but the real key is the creation of jobs and economic security and environmental issues for peoples of the global south. And I don't see almost any vision around this whatsoever coming from these technology companies, nor should we naively be trusting them, because even here in the US, we're facing deep economic anxieties around AI and massive investments in AI that are not materializing into real jobs or economic security.
Rahul, would you like to see Google open data centers in Jammu? Would you like to see NVIDIA invest in a new AI enterprise in Jammu and Kashmir, or does it need to be locally grown?
Yeah, definitely will welcome them, but we at the same time we would like to build it locally, because the data is the most important part here. Like it's just stated that they have the control over the data. For example, currently all the data that we are putting in the Google or the ChatGPT, they are in fact training our data, and they all having the access to our data. And we are having some a number of companies that we can count in fingers that are controlling all the data, like the OpenAI, Google, and a few others. So we will welcome them and definitely build something locally.
All right. Atoosa, should we ask developed countries, to share their AI resources with other countries, with developing countries?
So I want to kind of highlight that the relationship between the development and developing countries that we all know and we already heard, it's quite complex. And I think that definitely it would be very beneficial for the most powerful to share meaningful resources with regional people in a way that it empowers those regional people to go towards the goal of AI sovereignty. I think really we should push for regional AI sovereignty as much as possible in various different regions of the world. And that's the only way we can distribute the power and the beneficial impacts of artificial intelligence technologies. So any sort of sharing practice that goes towards that direction, towards that global goal, I am a supporter of that.
But then, Ramesh, again, you're nodding away. How do you push for regional sovereignty in the face of these, either the United States and China as very powerful countries, or they potentially even more powerful corporations that are currently in the AI race? How do you get regional sovereignty at all?
Look, these are really questions about power, right? And how power functions. In the United States, we are completely dominated, and well, I don't know if the word is dominant, but very strongly influenced by corporate power, specifically now the power of big tech. These are the wealthiest companies in the history of the world, and we saw them all bending the knee in a very performative way at Trump's inauguration. And ever since, we've seen them directly aligned with the president, even though in the first administration, there were tensions between them. So this is a question of checks and balances, which we're deeply struggling with right now here in the United States, right? This question of, can we really make sure that our democracy is vibrant? So when it comes to AI, ultimately, the question is one of democracy, right? How can a certain type of vision, which involves rules, policies, maybe competition from global other organizations, global companies, or even small companies in other parts of the world, can create more competition around AI so that there are more options. But this is a big issue because all the while people have not been compensated for their data. We don't have data unions, and we're facing more and more widening economic inequality in the United States, which is directly tied to the rise of nationalist populism. So the questions of tech are directly tied to questions of politics and vice versa.
And then we've got China's DeepSeek and Alibaba, large language models, open source. We've got OpenAI from the US, Ramesh. How can developing countries exploit those models and help reduce barriers for them? Or they just servants to them?
It's a really good question because in terms of the investment into infrastructures, energy, and resources, many global South countries have far fewer resources for that investment. That's why, certain types of partnerships could be beneficial as long as these countries maintain their sovereignty, as both my colleagues have been describing in our conversation today. However, the real issue is that that many of these other countries don't have that level of investment that is available for them to actually be actual competitors when it comes to these issues. But we do see when it comes to AI development that there are lots of different ways that this could take shape. If we go back to the DeepSeek story, they were able to essentially on pennies on the dollar emulate OpenAI's model at an excellent level when they published their white paper. So there are ways of building these systems out that are not so capitally expensive that could involve working with the free and open source software community and different approaches toward design that we can talk about as well. So generative AI doesn't have to involve these insane, massive investments that are not materializing into economic security for people around the world.
And Atoosa, what do you think about that? How can these open source AI models benefit or help developing countries?
Yeah, great question. I think there are different types of open source models, but the ones that I think are quite interesting are the ones that kind of like show how the model is being built, how the model is being trained, the data sets that are being used for training, fine-tuning the models are all available. And I think that kind of information, that kind of a knowledge can give a lot of leverage to people from low-income countries to learn and practice and just like have a hand-on experience. And what does it mean to build a model? What does it mean to evaluate a model? And so the younger generations, entrepreneurs from lower income countries would be able to kind of catch up. And so I think that's one way in which like really open source models can help the distribution of power, technological power globally.
All right. Rahul, are there any lessons to be learned from past efforts to close other digital divides? I'm thinking of like mobile telephones or even the internet.
So we need to actually, the efforts that we need to make to shorten the digital divide is to bring more and more policies. In fact, the government policy, because the individual and the private policies won't work in that case. So we need the government policy help from the government channels. For example, helping them with the resources, AI devices, AI subscription. In fact, because in most of the cases, we see that almost 97% of the subscriptions are free, and only the 3% are paid in most of the cases. So we need to provide free subscriptions and build locally with the, like you just mentioned, the open source models. That would be helpful.
Okay, Ramesh, any lessons to be learned from past attempts to bridge that digital divide with mobile telecoms and the internet?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we've seen over, many years of research and looking at so much scholarship and journalistic work on this is it's not just about spreading tools, right? These are not just blind, innocent tools. These are technologies designed by and for private corporations with certain values in mind. It's in the interest of the Googles and Metas of the world for everyone to have access to their products because it means more data for all of them. So it's not just about a naive divide. It's about voice and literacy and the ability to invest in one's own communities and create meaningful jobs at a time of great social and economic anxiety all around the world. And then the other huge elephant in the room, which we haven't discussed, are the environmental issues. Massive energy costs, massive access to fresh drinking water to cool these systems. These are otherwise considered externalities that these companies are largely not thinking about. But guess where a lot of energy resources and water sources might be taken from? As usual, probably from these countries of the global south. We've seen some examples of this tied to OpenAI and Google already in terms of access and use of water resources in places like Chile and South America already. So we truly need a more multipolar, multilateral world that drives AI. And the question is how do we achieve that outcome? And that's what I'm really hopeful for. And I'm passionate to try to be a small part in creating.
And Atoosa, from you, lessons to be learned from previous digital innovations?
Yeah, I think we need to kind of like focus on two things. One, that the gradual expansion and access and closing the gap of the divides kind of happens gradually. So we need to kind of like be a little bit patient. But I also want to really, really emphasize that digital divide, as was mentioned earlier, is not. We shouldn't think about digital divide as just giving access to a fully packaged technology that is being elsewhere. Digital divides would really only be overcome if we teach people, if we give people the literacy, the knowledge about AI, its beneficial impacts, and also its risk. And it's only in that when we give the knowledge that people would be able to meaningfully bridge a digital divide.
Okay, and Ramesh, we're talking about this today because it's on the UN agenda. It's high on the UNGA agenda this week. What can the UN do to help bridge the digital divide between the developed and developing world?
Well, this gets to one of the biggest questions of all, which is what is the sovereignty of the UN and the UN General Assembly? I mean, that's something we're looking at right now with the recognition of Palestinian statehood, with many other issues as well, right? So the real question is one of sovereignty, and sovereignty is directly tied to power. So I would say the UNGA should do everything and anything it can to truly democratize, as Atoosa was saying, literacy around these technologies, but also looking at these true literacy around AI is actually looking at the environmental issues. What is being turned into data? What data of ours is being used in these correlation systems? What in the world should not be turned into data, by the way? What types of intelligence are not about pattern recognition, right? So all of these skills, infrastructures, visions of jobs, visions of the future, environmental consciousness, all of this can start in the different constituent member states. So the UNGA needs to find a way to incentivize and create a far more multipolar world with different visions of AI in the ways it's going to treat people and planet. And therefore, we shouldn't just assume that the world is going to get better if we bow to Chinese and American AI. We see all the problems we see all the problems tied to big tech that we're dealing with here in the United States right now. That's not the vision for the world that the world should be embracing at all.
All right, folks, we are unfortunately out of time, but thank you very much. Thanks to all our guests, to Rahul Dogra, Atoosa Kasirzadeh and Ramesh Srinivasan. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.